My name is Edward Thompson, 68 years old and recently retired as a high school principal. After losing Martha, my wife of 40 years, to cancer 8 months ago, I welcomed our only son Thomas back home following his divorce. Lately, his behavior had grown strange, but I dismissed my concerns as grief clouding my judgment. Then came my routine checkup with Dr. Franklin, our family physician for decades. As I left, he discreetly slipped a note in my bag. Reading it later turned my blood cold. Run from your son. Now, if you've ever had that gut feeling something was wrong with someone you love, give this video a like and share where you're watching from. Before everything fell apart, I had what most would consider a good life. I'd spent 35 years as an educator, working my way up from teaching history to becoming principal at Westridge High School in our small Midwestern town. Not exactly glamorous work, but deeply satisfying. I took pride in helping shape young minds, in knowing most families in our community by name. The real joy in my life, though, was my marriage to Martha. We met in college, both studying education, though she eventually switched to nursing. She had this infectious laugh that could light up any room, and a way of seeing the best in people that balanced my sometimes overly pragmatic outlook. For 40 years, we built a life together in our modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street, the kind of place where neighbors still bring casseroles when someone's sick. Having children wasn't easy for us. Martha suffered through 3 miscarriages before we finally had Thomas. I still remember the day he was born, this tiny miracle with Martha's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. We called him our golden child, our second chance. Maybe that's why we spoiled him more than we should have. Thomas was always bright, testing well above his grade level from an early age. But there were signs, looking back, that something wasn't quite right. His preschool teacher noted he had trouble sharing and showing empathy when other children were hurt. In elementary school, he was sent to the principal's office several times for taking other children's possessions and lying about it. As a teenager, he became increasingly withdrawn and manipulative, playing Martha and me against each other to get what he wanted. I remember coming home one day to find Martha crying. Our neighbor's cat, which Thomas was supposed to be watching while they were on vacation, had died mysteriously. Thomas claimed it must have eaten something poisonous in the garden, but the vet found evidence suggesting deliberate harm. We couldn't prove anything, and Thomas was so convincing in his denial that we eventually convinced ourselves it must have been an accident. Despite these troubled moments, Thomas graduated near the top of his class and earned a scholarship to study biochemistry. He seemed to have outgrown his behavioral issues and went on to secure a promising position at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. He married Stephanie, a kind woman who worked as a pediatric nurse, and they had 2 beautiful children, Lily and Jake. Then Martha got sick. What started as persistent fatigue was diagnosed as stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, though she fought bravely for almost a year. I took early retirement to care for her, spending every possible moment by her side. Thomas visited occasionally, but always seemed uncomfortable around her deteriorating condition. After Martha passed, I fell into a deep depression. Our house, once full of her warmth and energy, became unbearably empty. I would find myself talking to her in empty rooms, setting the table for 2 out of habit, then breaking down when I realized my mistake. It was during this vulnerable time that Thomas called with news of his own crisis. His marriage to Stephanie had fallen apart. According to him, she had become unreasonable, demanding, and suspicious without cause. She filed for divorce and, to Thomas's shock and outrage, received full custody of their children, with Thomas only granted supervised visits every other weekend. "Dad, I need a place to stay while I get back on my feet," he told me over the phone. "The legal fees have wiped me out, and Stephanie is trying to take everything. How could I refuse my only son? Besides, I thought having someone else in the house might help pull me out of my grief." Thomas moved into his old bedroom, bringing surprisingly few possessions for someone who had lived independently for nearly 20 years. The first few weeks were awkward but manageable. Thomas spent most days allegedly job hunting after losing his position at Meridian under circumstances he was vague about. Something about budget cuts and being unfairly targeted by management. He helped with groceries occasionally and took over mowing the lawn, tasks I appreciated, as I had been neglecting many household chores since Martha's death. About a month after he moved in, I began noticing changes. Thomas started spending hours in the basement, which we had partially finished years ago as a recreation room. Strange chemical smells would waft up the stairs, and when questioned, he claimed he was working on independent research projects to bolster his resume. He installed a new lock on the basement door, saying he needed to protect his intellectual property. His sleep patterns became erratic. Often, I would hear him moving around the house at 3 or 4 in the morning. His mood swings became more pronounced. Some days he was attentive and almost overly concerned about my well-being, cooking elaborate meals and suggesting various supplements to keep my strength up. Other days, he was irritable and withdrawn, snapping at innocent questions and disappearing for hours without explanation. Then there were the phone calls. Thomas would take them outside or in the basement, speaking in hushed tones. Once I overheard fragments that troubled me. "It's taking longer than expected." "No, he suspects nothing. The insurance policy covers everything. Just need to be patient." New acquaintances began visiting our home, people Thomas introduced vaguely as business associates or research colleagues. They never stayed long and seemed uncomfortable, making eye contact with me. One man with a shaved head and tattoos covering both arms certainly didn't look like any pharmaceutical researcher I'd ever met. Perhaps most concerning was discovering my prescription medications had been tampered with. I take several pills daily for high blood pressure and cholesterol, keeping them organized in a weekly pill organizer. One morning, I noticed the pills looked slightly different. The blood pressure medication was a lighter shade of blue, and my statin was suddenly smaller than I remembered. When I mentioned this to Thomas, he laughed it off. "Dad, they're always changing manufacturers to save money. The pharmacy probably switched suppliers. It's the same medicine, just looks different." I wanted to believe him. After all, what father wants to suspect his own son of wrongdoing? Looking back, I can see how grief had clouded my judgment, making me desperate to maintain the one family connection I had left, even as the evidence mounted that something was terribly wrong in my own home. The first physical symptoms began so gradually I barely noticed them. A persistent fatigue that seemed to exceed normal grief. Occasional bouts of dizziness when standing up too quickly. Strange stomach cramps after meals, particularly when Thomas insisted on cooking for me. "You're looking thin, Dad," he commented one evening while serving an unusually bitter-tasting stew. "You need to keep your strength up. I'm worried about you." His concern seemed genuine, which only confused me more. If I hadn't imagined the other troubling signs, why would he now be showing such care for my health? The inconsistency was disorienting. Within 3 months of Thomas moving in, I had lost 15 pounds without trying. My hands occasionally developed a slight tremor, and I found myself struggling to remember routine details, like where I had placed my car keys or the name of a neighbor I'd known for decades. One morning, after a particularly bad night of stomach pain and nausea, I decided to speak directly with Thomas about my concerns. "I'm thinking of seeing Dr. Franklin," I said over breakfast. "Something doesn't feel right with my health lately." Thomas looked up sharply from his phone. "You're just getting older, Dad. Plus, grief affects people physically. Martha's only been gone 8 months. Still, these symptoms seem unusual. The confusion, the stomach problems. Early dementia can start with symptoms like that," Thomas interrupted, his voice taking on an authoritative tone, "especially after emotional trauma like losing Mom. Let me handle your medications. Maybe you're taking them incorrectly." "I've been managing my own pills for years," I protested. Thomas gave me a patronizing smile that reminded me uncomfortably of how I used to speak to confused students. "And now you're admitting to memory problems. It makes sense to let me help. I have a pharmaceutical background, remember?" The conversation left me feeling belittled and uncertain. Was I truly experiencing cognitive decline? Was grief magnifying normal aging processes into something more sinister in my mind? Later that week, I discovered a white powder residue on the kitchen counter after Thomas had prepared my evening tea. When I asked about it, he claimed it was a special sweetener, easier on diabetics, though I had never been diagnosed with diabetes. The explanation made little sense, but he quickly wiped away the evidence before I could examine it more closely. Another disturbing incident occurred when I walked into my home office to find Thomas hurriedly closing a file drawer. My financial documents, normally neatly organized, appeared disturbed. "Sorry, Dad," he said with an unconvincing smile, "just looking for Mom's old insurance paperwork. The hospital sent another bill I'm disputing." 2 days later, he casually asked if I had ever considered putting the house in a trust for tax purposes. The conversation somehow shifted to my life insurance policy, with Thomas asking detailed questions about the coverage amount and terms. "Just thinking ahead," he assured me when I questioned his sudden interest in my finances. "Someone needs to make sure everything's in order. You're not getting any younger." Around this time, I noticed several family heirlooms had gone missing: a gold pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather, Martha's pearl necklace I had planned to give to our granddaughter Lily when she turned 16. When confronted, Thomas suggested I had misplaced them, or, more insidiously, that perhaps I had forgotten giving them away already. "Remember how you gave that silver serving set to the church fundraiser last month?" he asked. I had done no such thing, but his confident assertion made me doubt my own memory. Was I truly becoming confused, or was Thomas deliberately manipulating me? My suspicions grew when I discovered Thomas had somehow gained access to my online banking. My account showed several unexplained transfers to an account I didn't recognize, each under $500. When questioned, Thomas claimed they were for household expenses and odd jobs around the house, producing vague receipts I couldn't verify. By this point, I felt increasingly isolated. Thomas had gradually taken over driving me to appointments, claiming concern about my occasional dizziness behind the wheel. This meant he controlled when I left the house and who I spoke with. He screened my phone calls, claiming to protect me from telemarketers but effectively limiting my contact with old friends and colleagues. Most troubling was his insistence on speaking with my doctors privately before I entered examination rooms. "Just updating them on observations I've made about your health," he explained. "As your caregiver, I need to make sure they have all the information." The term caregiver disturbed me deeply. When had I agreed to such an arrangement? How had our roles reversed so completely in just a few months? I began keeping a secret journal, hiding it inside an old history textbook I knew Thomas would never open. I documented my symptoms, the missing items, the strange incidents. Looking at the pattern laid out in my increasingly shaky handwriting, I could no longer deny something was very wrong. Either I was indeed experiencing serious cognitive decline, or someone was deliberately causing my symptoms and gaslighting me about them. The thought that this someone might be my own son was almost unbearable to contemplate. What reason could Thomas possibly have to harm me? If he wanted money, he was already accessing my accounts. If he wanted the house, I would have gladly signed it over to him eventually anyway, unless what he wanted was everything, immediately, and without having to wait for nature to take its course. The realization came with a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that had nothing to do with my mysterious physical symptoms. I needed professional help, someone outside Thomas's sphere of influence. I needed to see Dr. Franklin alone. My annual physical with Dr. Franklin was scheduled for a Tuesday in April. Thomas, as had become his habit, insisted on driving me. "I'll come in with you," he said as we pulled into the medical center parking lot. "Make sure you don't forget to mention those memory issues." I needed to think quickly. "Actually, could you pick up my prescription refills while I'm in with the doctor? The pharmacy said they'd be ready today, and it might save time." Thomas frowned. "I can do that after your appointment." "The lines get so long at lunchtime," I persisted. "Besides, Dr. Franklin always makes me wait. You know how backed up they get." After a moment's hesitation, Thomas agreed, giving me strict instructions to call him immediately after the appointment concluded. As I watched him drive toward the pharmacy across the street, a sense of urgency overtook me. This might be my only chance to speak privately with someone who could help. Walking into the clinic, I felt unusually weak, needing to pause and steady myself against the wall. Nancy, the nurse who had known me for 15 years, immediately noticed my condition. "Edward, are you all right? You look pale." She took my arm, guiding me to a chair in the reception area. "Where's Thomas? He usually hovers over you like a helicopter." "Picking up prescriptions," I managed to reply. "Nancy, I need to see Dr. Franklin alone. It's important." Something in my tone must have conveyed my desperation. Nancy nodded, quickly ushering me to an examination room without the usual weigh-in and preliminary checks. "Dr. Franklin will be right with you," she assured me, closing the door. Dr. Alan Franklin had been our family physician since Thomas was a child. In his early 70s now, he had been threatening retirement for years but continued practicing on a reduced schedule. When he entered the room, his usual jovial greeting died on his lips as he took in my appearance. "Edward," he said gravely, "what's happened to you? You've lost significant weight since I saw you 6 months ago." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. I haven't been well, but I'm not sure why. Dr. Franklin pulled up a chair, sitting directly in front of me rather than behind his desk. Tell me everything. And where's Thomas? He's usually quite insistent on being part of these conversations. For the next 15 minutes, I described my symptoms in detail: the fatigue, confusion, stomach issues, tremors, and weight loss. I hesitantly shared my concerns about Thomas's behavior, the missing medications, strange powders, financial irregularities, and his controlling actions. Dr. Franklin's expression grew increasingly troubled. Let's run some tests right away, he said, standing. I'm particularly concerned about these neurological symptoms combined with gastrointestinal distress. The examination was thorough. Blood was drawn, urine samples collected. Dr. Franklin tested my reflexes, cognitive function, and coordination, his frown deepening with each assessment. Edward, when did these symptoms begin exactly? He asked, while examining my eyes with a bright light. About 3 months ago. Shortly after Thomas started preparing most of my meals. Dr. Franklin paused, then carefully asked, and has Thomas shown particular interest in your medication regimen? He insists on organizing my pills now, says I can't be trusted to take them correctly. The doctor made notes in my chart, then abruptly changed direction. I understand Martha's death was difficult. How did Thomas react to his mother's passing? The question seemed odd, but I answered truthfully. He seemed detached, almost relieved when it was over. I assumed it was his way of handling grief. And Martha's decline was surprisingly rapid, wasn't it? Even for pancreatic cancer? A cold feeling settled in my chest. What are you suggesting? Dr. Franklin placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I need you to be completely honest. Has Thomas ever expressed interest in your financial affairs? Life insurance? Estate planning? Increasingly so, I admitted, especially in recent months. Just then, Nancy knocked urgently on the door. Dr. Franklin, Thomas Thompson just called, asking if his father's appointment is finishing soon. He's on his way back from the pharmacy. Dr. Franklin's expression hardened with decision. Nancy, stall him if he arrives. Tell him we're waiting on some test results. He turned back to me, lowering his voice. Edward, I don't want to alarm you, but your symptoms are consistent with low-level poisoning. Poisoning? I repeated, the word feeling surreal. That's impossible. Who would? I couldn't finish the sentence, the implication too horrible to voice. Your blood work from last month already showed some concerning levels of certain metals, he continued. I didn't connect the dots until now. I ordered additional testing because the pattern seemed unusual, but today's examination makes me highly concerned. You think Thomas is poisoning me? The words came out as barely a whisper. I can't make that accusation without proof, Dr. Franklin replied carefully. But as your physician and friend of 30 years, I'm deeply concerned about your safety. The rapid weight loss, neurological symptoms, and circumstances you've described raise serious red flags. He went to his desk, scribbling something on a prescription pad. Then he pulled several medical journal printouts from a folder, rolled them together with the note, and slipped the bundle into my jacket pocket. These are the lab results from your previous visit, and some information on heavy metal poisoning. Read them when you're alone. And Edward, his voice dropped even lower, do not go home with Thomas today. Go to your brother's house, a hotel, anywhere else. Call the police if necessary. But surely I'm overreacting, I protested weakly. He's my son. Dr. Franklin's eyes were grave. That's what makes this so difficult to accept. But Edward, if I'm right, your life is in danger. The poisoning appears to be accelerating. A text message alert sounded on the doctor's phone. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. Thomas is in the waiting room now, demanding to know what's taking so long. I need you to make a decision. In that moment, I couldn't fully process what I was being told. The idea that Thomas, my only child, would deliberately harm me was so monstrous, so contrary to everything I wanted to believe, that my mind rebelled against it. I need to think about this, I said finally. Maybe confront him directly. Dr. Franklin looked disappointed but not surprised. That could be dangerous if my suspicions are correct. At least read what I've given you before you say anything to him. And Edward, he gripped my arm firmly. Call me any time, day or night, if you need help. As I left the examination room on shaky legs, I felt Dr. Franklin slip something else into my bag. Glancing down, I saw a folded note. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The doctor's urgent whisper followed me down the hallway. "Don't go home. Run from your son." But despite the warning, despite the evidence, I walked straight to the waiting room where Thomas stood impatiently, his face a mask of concern that no longer seemed genuine. "Dad, you look terrible. What did the doctor say?" "Just some tests," I mumbled. "Let's go home." As we walked to the car, I felt the weight of Dr. Franklin's note in my bag like a ticking bomb. What would I find if I finally forced myself to look squarely at the truth? The 20-minute drive home was excruciating. Thomas peppered me with questions about the appointment, his tone oscillating between concern and something more calculating. "What tests did Franklin run? Did he mention anything about your cognitive function? Did he suggest any specialists for your memory issues?" Each question felt like a probe, testing how much I knew or suspected. "Just routine stuff," I replied vaguely, gazing out the passenger window. "Blood work, reflexes, the usual." "You were in there a long time for routine tests," Thomas observed, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Dr. Franklin was running behind. "Had an emergency before me." The lie felt clumsy on my tongue. I had never been a good liar, something Martha used to tease me about. Thomas gave me a sideways glance I couldn't quite interpret. "We need to stop at the grocery store. We're out of several things. This unexpected detour might give me time to think." I nodded agreement, still trying to process Dr. Franklin's shocking suggestion. Poisoning. The word kept repeating in my mind like an unwelcome echo. At the supermarket, Thomas insisted I wait in the car, claiming I looked too tired to walk around the store. Under normal circumstances, I would have protested, but today I welcomed the opportunity to be alone. As soon as his figure disappeared through the automatic doors, I pulled Dr. Franklin's rolled papers from my jacket pocket. The lab results were complex, full of medical terminology I didn't fully understand, but certain highlights jumped out. Elevated levels of arsenic, unusual traces of thallium. A note from Dr. Franklin questioning why these toxins would be present in a retired educator with no occupational exposure risks. The attached medical journal articles described symptoms of chronic heavy metal poisoning, gastrointestinal distress, peripheral neuropathy, cognitive changes, weight loss, fatigue. I recognized my own experience in every paragraph. With trembling hands, I then unfolded the note Dr. Franklin had slipped into my bag. The message was brief but unambiguous. "RUN from your son, now. Call me when you're somewhere safe." Looking up, I saw Thomas exiting the store, pushing a cart with a few grocery items. My son, my only child. The boy Martha and I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. How could I reconcile that lifetime of memories with the monstrous possibility now facing me? Thomas loaded the groceries into the trunk, then slid into the driver's seat. I quickly tucked the papers back into my pocket, trying to compose my features into a neutral expression. "They had a sale on cleaning supplies," Thomas commented as he started the car. "I picked up some specialized products for the basement." I nodded absently, then noticed something troubling. Among the grocery bags visible in the rearview mirror was one from the pharmacy. It contained bottles that were definitely not my regular medications. "What else did you get?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just some supplements I've been researching. Great for cognitive health and longevity." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll add them to your evening routine." The rest of the drive passed in tense silence. My mind raced through memories of Thomas growing up, searching for signs I might have missed, warnings I should have heeded. The strange incidents with pets in the neighborhood. The way other children seemed afraid of him despite his surface charm. His lack of genuine remorse when caught in lies or minor destructive acts. Martha had always defended him, finding excuses or explanations for his behavior. "He's just sensitive," she would say. "He processes emotions differently." Had her maternal love blinded her to something fundamentally wrong with our son? Had my own desperate desire for a normal family done the same? Back home, Thomas busied himself unpacking groceries while I retreated to my bedroom, claiming fatigue from the doctor's visit. Once alone, I sat heavily on the edge of the bed Martha and I had shared for 4 decades, trying to think clearly through the fog of confusion and betrayal. If Dr. Franklin was correct, my life was in immediate danger. But where could I go? How could I leave without Thomas becoming suspicious? And most troublingly, how could I be absolutely certain these terrible suspicions were justified? I needed more information and someone to confide in. With shaking hands, I dialed my brother William's number, keeping my voice low. William had never particularly liked Thomas, something I had attributed to typical family dynamics. Now I wondered if my brother had seen something in my son that I had been blind to. "Will, it's Ed," I whispered when he answered. "I need to talk to you about something serious, but I can't speak freely right now." William, always perceptive, immediately understood the gravity in my tone. "What's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Maybe. I need a place to stay, possibly tonight. And I can't explain why over the phone." "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "My door is always open to you. Do you need me to come get you?" "No, that might complicate things. I'll try to drive myself if I can get access to my car keys." Thomas had recently begun keeping track of my keys, another supposed protection against my confusion. "Ed, you're scaring me. Are you in danger? Should I call the police?" "Not yet," I said, hearing Thomas's footsteps in the hallway. "I'll call you back." I quickly ended the call as my bedroom door opened without a knock. Thomas stood in the doorway, a glass of water in one hand and several pills in the other. "Time for your medication, Dad," he said with a smile that seemed practiced rather than warm. "And I've added those supplements I mentioned." Looking at the collection of pills, I noticed immediately they didn't match my usual prescriptions. More troubling was a small, whitish powder partially dissolved in the water. "Actually, I'm feeling a bit nauseous," I said, thinking quickly. "Let me wait until after dinner to take those." A flash of annoyance crossed Thomas's face before he composed it back into concern. "The doctor would want you to stay on schedule. These will help you feel better." "I'm sure a small delay won't hurt," I insisted, more firmly than I had spoken to him in months. Thomas placed the pills and water on my nightstand, his movements deliberate. "Suit yourself. But don't forget them. I'll check later." The subtle threat in his tone was unmistakable. After he left, I flushed the pills down the toilet in my ensuite bathroom and poured the suspicious water into a small empty cologne bottle I found in the cabinet, in case it might later serve as evidence. I needed to get out of the house, but first I needed to confirm my suspicions beyond any doubt. If I was wrong about Thomas, the damage to our relationship would be irreparable. I needed proof, something concrete I could show the police if necessary. The basement. Whatever Thomas was hiding would be there, in his locked research space. But how to get access with Thomas in the house? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I heard the shower start running in the hallway bathroom. Thomas was usually thorough about his hygiene, typically spending at least 15 minutes bathing. This might be my only opportunity. Moving quietly, I retrieved the spare key set I had hidden inside a hollowed-out book in my office, including a key to the basement door from before Thomas had changed the lock. It probably wouldn't work, but I had to try something. To my surprise and relief, the old key still worked. Either Thomas had used the existing lock mechanism when installing the new handle, or he had been careless enough to use a standard lock that my key happened to fit. With one last glance toward the bathroom where the shower still ran, I opened the basement door and descended into the unknown, my heart pounding with each step. What I would discover in the coming minutes would either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest forever. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. The basement stairs creaked slightly under my weight as I descended, each sound amplified by my fear of discovery. The shower was still running upstairs, but I knew my window of opportunity was narrow. At the bottom of the stairs, I fumbled for the light switch, my hand trembling. What illuminated before me was shocking. Our once ordinary basement, which had housed holiday decorations and Martha's sewing table, had been transformed into something between a laboratory and a sick obsession. One section contained chemistry equipment I vaguely recognized from Thomas's college days. Glass beakers, Bunsen burners, measuring tools, and containers of various powders and liquids were meticulously arranged on a large workbench. More disturbing was the opposite wall, which Thomas had covered with what could only be described as a surveillance chart of my deterioration. Photographs of me taken at different times over the past 6 months showed my gradual physical decline. I barely recognized the gaunt, confused-looking man in the most recent images, though I knew it was me. Next to each photo, Thomas had noted my weight, observed symptoms, and behavior changes. A desk in the corner held several notebooks and a laptop. I moved toward it, aware that each second increased the danger of Thomas discovering me. The top notebook was labeled Project Inheritance in Thomas's precise handwriting. With growing horror, I opened it and began to read. The contents were methodical, detached, and utterly damning. Thomas had documented a precise poisoning regimen, starting with small doses of arsenic introduced into my food 6 months ago, gradually increasing the concentration. He noted my reactions with scientific detachment. Subject showing initial symptoms: minor gastrointestinal distress, fatigue, no suspicion evident, increased dosage by 10%. Subject complaining of persistent stomach pain. Convinced him it's acid reflux. Cognitive effects becoming apparent. Short-term memory compromised. Subject increasingly reliant on my assistance, which facilitates administration. I felt physically ill reading his clinical observations of my suffering. Pages later, the entries revealed an escalation. Introduced thallium alongside arsenic. Accelerated neurological symptoms should manifest within 30 days. Need to ensure degradation appears natural due to upcoming insurance review. Another notebook contained detailed financial research. Thomas had cataloged every aspect of my finances, from bank accounts and retirement funds to the home equity and life insurance. He had drafted a modified will, apparently planning to somehow get me to sign it, that would leave everything to him. Most chilling was a page titled "Timeline to Liquidation" that outlined how quickly he could convert my assets to cash after my natural death. A third notebook had a section labeled "Precedent Success" that made my blood run cold. With growing horror, I turned pages that detailed observations of Martha's cancer progression with small notations about supplemental compounds administered alongside her prescribed medications. Certain entries were starred, noting when her symptoms had suddenly worsened following Thomas's interventions. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the notebook. Had Thomas accelerated Martha's death too? The possibility was too horrible to contemplate, yet the evidence was before me in his own handwriting. The laptop was password protected, but a yellow legal pad beside it contained what appeared to be draft text messages. Reading them confirmed my worst fears. Everything proceeding as planned. The old man suspects nothing. His doctor might be becoming suspicious, but too late to matter now. Final phase begins next week. Have buyer lined up for the house. We can meet in Aruba, as discussed, to transfer the funds. Don't worry about the children. Once I have the insurance money, I'll fight for custody again. Stephanie won't have the resources to stop me. This last note particularly disturbed me. Was he planning to regain custody of his children after securing my money? What might he do to them if they became inconvenient to his plans? I moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, finding folders with my medical records, copies of my financial statements, and, troublingly, several empty containers for chemicals. Reading the warning labels made my stomach clench. Thallium sulfate, arsenic trioxide, sodium azide, all highly toxic substances that could cause symptoms matching my recent decline. A sound from upstairs startled me. The shower had stopped. With frantic haste, I grabbed Thomas's main notebook and his phone, which I spotted charging on the desk. Desperately searching for anything else I could use as evidence, I noticed an array of small bottles on a shelf, labeled with dates. One was marked Martha Final Dose, and another, chillingly, had today's date with my name. Taking the phone and notebook, I moved toward the stairs, then froze at the sound of footsteps above. Thomas was moving around, probably looking for me. I glanced around desperately for a hiding place or alternative exit, but the basement had only one entrance. I was trapped. With no better option, I retreated to the darkest corner behind the old water heater, praying Thomas wouldn't come down. I unlocked his phone, finding it required only a fingerprint rather than a passcode. The text messages confirmed everything. In conversations with someone saved as partner, Thomas discussed in explicit detail his plan to murder me for financial gain. The slow approach is working perfectly. No one suspects poison. They think it's just age and grief. Doctor appointment Tuesday. Need to ensure he doesn't go alone. Too risky. If all goes according to schedule, we'll have everything liquidated by June. 7 figures, split 70 over 30, as agreed. And most damning of all, a message from just 3 days ago. Used same method on mother last year. Worked perfectly. Medical examiner ruled natural causes, cancer complications. The basement door opened above. Light spilled down the stairs, followed by Thomas's voice. "Dad, are you down there?" I remained frozen, barely breathing, clutching the evidence of my son's betrayal. His footsteps started down the stairs, slow and deliberate. "I know you're down here." The door was unlocked. His voice had changed, all pretense of warmth gone. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the old key missing? Come out now, and we can discuss this rationally." Like a cornered animal, I knew I had only one chance. As Thomas reached the bottom of the stairs, I burst from my hiding place, charging toward the exit with a desperate energy I hadn't felt in months. Thomas moved to intercept me, his face contorted with a cold fury I'd never seen before. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said, blocking my path. "You've complicated everything." In that moment, looking into the eyes of my only son, I saw nothing of the child Martha and I had raised. Whatever humanity might have once existed in Thomas had been hollowed out, replaced by a calculating emptiness that chilled me to my core. I clutched the phone and notebook to my chest like a shield. "I know what you've been doing to me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "and what you did to your mother." Thomas's expression shifted to something like relief. "Finally, we can drop the charade. Do you have any idea how exhausting it's been, pretending to care about you all these months?" He took a step toward me. "Now, why don't you give me back my property, and we can make this quick and painless?" I knew with terrifying certainty that if I didn't escape the basement immediately, I would never leave it alive. "Stay back," I warned, backing toward the stairs while keeping my eyes locked on Thomas. "The police are on their way." It was a desperate bluff, but I needed any advantage I could create. Thomas smiled coldly. "No, they're not. Your phone is upstairs on your nightstand. I checked before coming down. And William won't help you either. I listened to that pathetic call you made." He took another step toward me. "Did you really think I wouldn't monitor your communications? I've controlled everything in your life for months now." "Why?" The question escaped me before I could stop it. "I'm your father. I would have given you anything you asked for." "Eventually, sure. But your projected lifespan was too long to wait, and splitting the estate with those brats Stephanie calls my children, unacceptable." Thomas spoke with casual disdain, as if discussing an inconvenient business transaction rather than patricide. "You planned all this? Moving back home after your divorce?" Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "The divorce was real enough. Stephanie became suspicious when I started practicing certain techniques on her. Headaches, mysterious rashes. She was smarter than you, started keeping samples. Nothing conclusive, but enough to scare her into leaving." His expression hardened. "Her testimony cost me custody. Another problem I'll rectify once I have the resources." My back hit the bottom stair. One small victory. If I could keep him talking while inching upward. "And Martha? Your own mother?" Something flashed in Thomas's eyes, perhaps the closest thing to emotion he was capable of feeling. Mother was always too perceptive. She was beginning to notice discrepancies in her medication, asking uncomfortable questions. The cancer was a convenient coincidence. I just helped it along. The casual admission of matricide sent a wave of nausea through me so powerful I nearly lost my balance. Martha had suffered terribly in her final months. To think that her own son had deliberately extended and intensified that suffering was beyond comprehension. "You're a monster," I whispered, taking another step up. "I prefer pragmatist," Thomas replied, moving toward the workbench. "This was never personal, Dad, just efficient financial planning. Unfortunately, you forced me to accelerate the timeline." He picked up a syringe from the bench, removing the protective cap. "This would have been your path anyway, just spread over another few weeks. Consider it a mercy that we're expediting things." Terror gave me clarity. I needed to get up the stairs, but Thomas would easily overtake me in my weakened condition before I reached the top. I needed a distraction. "The journal and phone won't help you," Thomas said, nodding at the items clutched against my chest. "I'll dispose of them along with you. The official story will be that you wandered off during an episode of dementia. Tragic, but not suspicious given your recent cognitive decline." As he approached with the syringe, I recalled something from decades of living in this house that Thomas might have forgotten. Halfway up the stairs was an old fire alarm pull station, installed when the basement had briefly served as a tenant apartment before Thomas was born. We had never had it disconnected. "You won't get away with this," I said, continuing my slow backward ascent. "Dr. Franklin already suspects. He took blood samples today." Thomas hesitated momentarily. "Franklin will have nothing concrete, and even if he did, no evidence connecting it to me. Now enough stalling. He lunged forward, just as my hand found the fire alarm behind me. With every ounce of strength remaining, I pulled the lever down. The shrieking alarm was deafening in the confined space. Thomas staggered back, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected noise. I seized the opportunity, turning to scramble up the stairs as quickly as my weakened legs would allow. "You think a noise will save you?" Thomas shouted over the alarm, recovering quickly and starting up the stairs after me. "The neighbors will ignore it. No one's coming to help you." He was partially right. Our neighbors had endured enough false alarms from this system over the years to become complacent, but the alarm served another purpose. It was directly wired to the security company Martha had insisted on using after a break-in 15 years ago. Within minutes, they would call, and if we didn't answer with the correct password, they would dispatch emergency services. I reached the top of the stairs, slamming the door behind me and turning the old key in the lock. It wouldn't hold Thomas for long, but every second counted. Moving with desperate purpose toward the front door, I could hear him already breaking through the flimsy basement door. My hand was on the front doorknob when Thomas erupted into the hallway, face contorted with rage, syringe still clutched in his right hand. "There's nowhere to go, Dad," he snarled, advancing toward me. "You can barely stand. How far do you think you'll get before I catch you?" He was right. I was exhausted, my poisoned body betraying me when I needed strength most. But adrenaline and survival instinct gave me one final push. I yanked open the front door and stumbled out into the night, nearly falling down the porch steps. The cool evening air hit my face as I screamed for help, my voice sounding foreign and frail to my own ears. "Help! Someone help me! He's trying to kill me!" Thomas followed onto the porch, then froze as lights came on in the neighbor's house across the street. Our neighbor Frank appeared in his doorway, peering over. "Everything okay, Ed?" he called, concern evident in his voice. Thomas instantly shifted his demeanor, putting an arm around my shoulders in a grotesque pantomime of filial concern. "It's fine, Frank," he called back with forced cheerfulness. "Dad's having one of his episodes. The medication makes him confused." "I'm not confused," I shouted, pulling away from Thomas's grip. "He's been poisoning me. Call the police." Frank's expression changed from concern to alarm. He stepped fully outside, now joined by his wife Sandra. Thomas tightened his grip painfully on my arm, the syringe partially concealed against my side. "See what I mean? The dementia causes paranoid delusions, so sad to witness." I locked eyes with Frank, desperation giving my gaze an intensity that cut through the night. "Frank, you've known me for 30 years. Am I a man who loses his mind? Please, call the police. Look at what he's holding against me." Frank hesitated, looking between us, clearly uncertain who to believe. In that moment of indecision, the security company's call came through on the house phone, its ring audible through the open door. Thomas's head turned reflexively toward the sound, momentarily loosening his grip. With one final surge of desperate strength, I broke free, stumbling down the remaining porch steps. Behind me, I heard Thomas swear, then the sound of his footsteps retreating into the house. He would have to answer the security call or risk immediate dispatch of emergency services. I staggered across our front lawn toward Frank and Sandra, still clutching Thomas's phone and notebook. "Please," I gasped. "Help me. Call the police. He's been poisoning me for months." Frank, bless him, made his decision. He hurried down his own porch steps to meet me, supporting my weight as my strength finally gave out. Sandra was already on her cell phone, speaking urgently to emergency services. Behind me, I heard the distinctive sound of Thomas's car starting. Headlights swept across the street as he backed out of the driveway at dangerous speed, tires squealing as he accelerated away. As my consciousness began to fade, I was vaguely aware of being lowered gently onto Frank and Sandra's porch swing. The evidence of Thomas's betrayal was still clutched in my trembling hands as distant sirens began to wail. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Thomas's taillights disappearing down the street, carrying my son away into the night. Not toward safety, as he might have believed, but toward an inevitable reckoning with the monstrous truth he could no longer hide. I woke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the sensation of someone holding my hand. Opening my eyes with effort, I found my brother William sitting beside the bed, his lined face creased with worry. "Welcome back," he said gently, squeezing my hand. "You gave us quite a scare." My throat felt dry and raw. "How long?" I managed to rasp. 3 days, William replied, helping me sip water through a straw. They had to flush the toxins from your system. Doctor says you'll recover, but it will take time. Memories flooded back with terrible clarity. Thomas? William's expression darkened. Gone. Police are looking for him. They found enough evidence in your house to issue a warrant immediately. He hesitated before adding, Ed, what they discovered in that basement, it's unimaginable. A police detective named Rodriguez visited later that day, notebook in hand, his manner compassionate but professional. We've confirmed significant levels of arsenic and thallium in your system, he explained. Consistent with long-term poisoning, just as Dr. Franklin suspected. The notebooks? The phone? I asked anxiously. Safe in evidence, Rodriguez assured me. Along with everything we recovered from the basement lab. It's the most methodically documented attempted murder I've seen in 25 years of police work. Over the next several days, the full horror of Thomas's actions came into focus through police briefings and conversations with Dr. Franklin, who visited daily. The basement had contained enough poison to kill me several times over. The timeline in Thomas's notebook indicated he had planned my death for the coming week, having recently accelerated his schedule after noting Dr. Franklin's suspicions. Most devastating was the confirmation of my worst fear. We're reopening the investigation into your wife's death, Detective Rodriguez told me gently. The preliminary findings suggest Thomas may have hastened her decline by introducing additional toxins alongside her cancer medications. The thought that Martha had suffered needlessly, her pain intensified and death accelerated by our own son, brought a grief so profound I could barely breathe through it. William stayed with me through that dark night, sitting silently as I wept for my wife, mourning her all over again with this new, terrible knowledge. 2 weeks into my hospital stay, Thomas's ex-wife Stephanie visited with a forensic accountant she had hired during their divorce. I always knew something was wrong, she told me, her eyes haunted. He started experimenting on me first, I think. Small doses that made me sick enough to worry but not enough to hospitalize me. When I started keeping samples of food and drink after he prepared them, he became threatening. That's when I left and filed for divorce. The accountant had discovered financial irregularities in Thomas's handling of joint accounts and suspicious transactions dating back years. He was siphoning money from my inheritance into offshore accounts, Stephanie explained. The divorce proceedings exposed some of it, but not the full extent. Most chilling were her observations about Thomas's relationship with their children. He was cold with them, calculating, using them as props when beneficial, ignoring them otherwise. When the court granted me full custody with only supervised visitation for Thomas, he seemed more angry about losing control than missing his children. A month after my hospitalization, as my strength gradually returned, news came that changed everything. Thomas had been apprehended in Arizona, attempting to cross into Mexico. He had been living under an assumed identity, using cash withdrawals from accounts he had set up in my name. When cornered by authorities, he had attempted to take his own life but failed. He'll stand trial for attempted murder, Detective Rodriguez informed me. And likely for your wife's death as well, once the medical examiner completes the review of her exhumed remains. The evidence was overwhelming. Beyond Thomas's detailed notebooks and text messages, police had recovered video recordings from small cameras he had hidden throughout the house, documenting his poisoning regimen. He had recorded himself adding toxins to my food and medication, apparently to review his techniques and refine his approach. As my physical health improved, the emotional healing proved far more challenging. How does a father reconcile the love he feels for his child with the knowledge that this same child methodically attempted to murder him? How does one process the discovery that the person you helped create harbors such capacity for calculated evil? Guilt consumed me. I should have seen the signs, I told William during a particularly dark moment. All those years ago, the incidents with animals, the manipulation, the lack of empathy. Martha and I made excuses, believed he would outgrow it. You can't blame yourself, William insisted. You were parents who loved your child, who saw the best in him. That's not a failure, Ed. Dr. Franklin recommended a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal. Dr. Winters helped me understand that Thomas's pathology wasn't my creation. Some individuals are born with limited capacity for empathy, she explained. Environmental factors can influence expression, but you cannot create a sociopath through parenting alone, nor can you necessarily prevent one from developing despite the most loving upbringing. I couldn't return to the house on Maple Street. Too many memories, both beautiful ones with Martha and horrific ones of recent months, permeated those walls. William insisted I stay with him during my recovery, converting his home office into a bedroom for me. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "Forever if you want. This house is too big for just me anyway." As my case gained media attention, I received letters from others who had experienced similar betrayals by family members. Their stories of survival and eventual healing provided a roadmap through my darkest moments. I began corresponding with several of them, finding unexpected solace in this community forged through shared trauma. 6 months after my escape from Thomas, I attended the preliminary hearing for his trial. Seeing him in the courtroom, thin and pale in prison attire, I searched his face for any sign of the child I had raised, the boy who had once played catch in our backyard and brought home science fair ribbons. I found nothing familiar in his cold, assessing gaze. When Thomas spotted me, his expression didn't change. No remorse, no shame, not even anger. Just clinical evaluation, as if I remained nothing more than a subject in his failed experiment. In that moment, I realized that my son, in any meaningful sense of that word, was gone. Perhaps he had never truly existed beyond the mask he had worn to navigate a world he viewed only as a series of obstacles and opportunities. That realization, painful as it was, began my true healing. I sold the house, donating most of the proceeds to organizations supporting victims of domestic poisoning and elder abuse. I kept only Martha's jewelry and photo albums, leaving behind the material possessions that Thomas had coveted enough to kill for. With William's encouragement, I began speaking to senior groups about my experience, warning others about the signs I had missed and the manipulation I had endured. Each presentation was difficult, requiring me to relive the betrayal. But the gratitude of those who recognized their own situations in my story made the pain worthwhile. 1 year after that terrible night, I received news that Thomas had been sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The evidence from Martha's exhumed remains had indeed confirmed poisoning alongside her cancer. Thomas offered no defense beyond claiming diminished capacity, which the extensive planning documented in his notes thoroughly disproved. I did not attend the sentencing. Instead, I spent that day at Martha's grave, speaking to her as if she could hear me, apologizing for not protecting her, for not seeing the danger within our own family. In my heart, I felt her forgiveness, and perhaps the beginning of my own self-forgiveness as well. Today, 2 years since Dr. Franklin slipped that life-saving note into my bag, I live in a small apartment near William's house. My health has largely recovered, though certain neurological effects of the poisoning may never fully resolve. I volunteer at a center for victims of family violence, sharing my story and listening to others. The most difficult question people ask is whether I still love my son. The honest answer is that I love who I thought he was, the child I believed I was raising. The actual person, the calculating predator who systematically poisoned his mother and attempted to murder me for financial gain, is someone I never truly knew. I cannot love a stranger who happens to share my DNA, particularly one capable of such calculated cruelty. What I've learned through this ordeal is that real love requires truth. The love I felt for Thomas was based on an illusion he carefully maintained. When that illusion shattered, what remained wasn't love but its hollow echo. True connection cannot exist alongside such fundamental deception. If my story serves any purpose, let it be this warning. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, especially with those closest to you, pay attention. Dr. Franklin saved my life with his courage to voice the unthinkable. Had I heeded his warning immediately instead of returning home that day, I might have been spared the final confrontation and discovery. And yet, perhaps I needed to see the truth with my own eyes to truly accept it. Some revelations are too monstrous to embrace without irrefutable evidence. I had to stand in that basement laboratory, reading Thomas's clinical observations of my suffering, to finally acknowledge what my heart had refused to see. Have you ever ignored warning signs about someone close to you? Have you dismissed that uneasy feeling when something didn't add up? If this story resonates with you in any way, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that might just save a life. And please leave a comment sharing any warning signs you've learned to recognize in your own experiences. By sharing our wisdom, we create a safety net for others. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need the kind of warning Dr. Franklin gave me, but if such a warning comes, may you have the courage to heed it immediately. Sometimes, running from someone you love is the only way to survive.